Hello, everyone. We are excited to be back with another CaCo Talks. Today is the start of our mini mental health series. We are starting this series off talking about all things trauma. We've got a lot to discuss, so let's dive into this chat.
Before we get started, we want to mention that today's video may be a trigger for some listeners. We are discussing sensitive material that may be a trigger for some. We want you all to know that we deeply value your wellness and mental health. If you believe our discussion may be a trigger for you, please join us in the next CaCo Talks.
So to get us started today, we're going to go through some brief defining of different things concerning trauma. So Courtney, you want to take us into some basic definitions so we can all understand trauma?
Yeah, so everybody throws around the word trauma, right? Like we all have heard like trauma. Like if you scroll through TikTok, they're like childhood trauma, adult trauma, whatever. But so just so we have that understanding, trauma is defined as an emotional response to a terrible event or like an accident, a rape, natural disaster. Immediately after that event, shock and denial are typical. Longer-term reactions can include unpredictable emotions, flashbacks, strained relationships, and even physical symptoms like headaches, nausea. So trauma, really just to break it down, is an emotional response to some sort of event, right? Terrible event, usually some bad, negative, adverse event. So yeah, and there's different types of trauma too, you know? So if you want to get into a little more of like the different types of trauma, because all trauma obviously is not the same type of trauma.
Yeah, so there's acute trauma, which results from a single incident. You have chronic trauma, which is repeated and prolonged trauma, such as domestic abuse or domestic violence. And then there's complex trauma, which is exposure to varied and multiple traumatic events, often of an invasive interpersonal nature. So those are the three types. And there's also quite a bit of, psychological effects to the brain and physical effects to the body. And those include altering the structure and or wiring of the brain and the chemistry. For the body, the symptoms may include headaches, nausea, high blood pressure, heart rate, stroke, and or pulling inward / an internal stress. So those are not necessarily exclusive to adult or childhood trauma. I think they're pretty interchangeable as far as that is concerned.
Yeah. So I think actually I kind of want to go back to that definition of trauma because I think what we have to really highlight and what people seem to miss sometimes is that trauma really is about the response, right? That's what you really are. That's where I guess the issues come into play is like your response because, it's like bad things happen, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you are going to respond health in a healthy way to it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So what we're really going to be discussing and what trauma really is your personal response to said event, like we were saying, a car accident, a rape, a natural disaster, just like abuse in your home, or even like things like bullying, like everyday kind of like bad events, I guess,
Yeah. So and I think also to add to trauma, trauma is something that is the event itself is something that may be personal to you, in the sense of it is your experience. No one else can say that was or is not traumatic for you. That is something that, in my personal opinion, you deem traumatic for you. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Yeah,
So,
because like we were saying, like we have a childhood trauma, but that manifested very differently for you and then for me.
Absolutely.
So it's not like, the same one thing that our parents might have done may not have affected you the same way that it affected me. Like maybe it wasn't exactly a trauma response for me the same way it might have been a trauma response for you,
or you
and
may
vice
not
versa.
consider that traumatic versus I may have considered, and vice versa.
So. Exactly. Yeah. So that's why I think it's important that we really hone in on like that trauma is a response to something, because that changes depending on the person and the event. You know what I mean? It's not it's not like as bad as it sounds. Like if, a hurricane comes through, and that doesn't mean that it actually is traumatic to everybody. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Yeah.
And so that's why I think some people can be dismissive of trauma is because they don't see certain things as trauma, you know?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, um, but we all know, but we all have it in different ways. So,
Mhm.
um, but yeah,
And
and
I think
that,
we all
and
experience it in one way or another, right? I don't know
exactly,
anyone that has not had something in their life that is traumatic, whether that be, how their parents treated them, or like physical abuse, or emotional abuse, or maybe experiencing like bullying or something like that in school. So I don't know a single person that has not experienced trauma, whether adult or child. So
exactly.
that's one of the main things of why we wanted to hit on it today is because especially in today's time with the people I've experienced, everybody is experiencing trauma currently and or from childhood trauma, and that plays into how they treat people today, and
As
and
adults.
maybe some personal problems and all those things like that. So it all comes full circle. So we definitely wanted to hit on that today.
Yeah, hit on this. And I think it's like good. This is where you need to start those mental health conversations because we have to
Hmm.
address a problem before we, or we have to state a problem before we address it and heal it, right?
Absolutely.
Because, if you don't first say, I've experienced something traumatic or I experienced something bad, how can you then
Hmm.
heal it? Then you're still
Exactly.
in that sort of, oh, well, nothing happened to me, so there's nothing to
Hmm.
address. So
Yeah.
you have to, ground one, I think, is defining trauma, knowing what it is, and saying, how has this happened to me? Which
Yeah.
is, a really good segue into understanding the difference between childhood trauma and adult trauma.
Hmm.
Today, we want to really kind of focus on childhood trauma as it relates to our discussion today, but childhood trauma is what the name sounds, trauma deriving from your childhood, from adverse childhood experiences, negative
Hmm.
experiences in your childhood that affect who you become as an adult. And then adult trauma is obviously trauma you experience as an adult, right?
Hmm.
Which can also impact your life the same way. But
Yeah.
there's a difference in how your brain is working and how your body is functioning as a child versus an adult. So,
Exactly. Hmm.
yeah,
And as a child too, the effects of trauma can be everlasting just because your brain is also developing at that time. If you're constantly rewiring the brain to, make way for trauma and responding to trauma, then that brain is not going to be developed as quote unquote a normal brain. So, childhood trauma looks very different than adult trauma, though it may have the physical manifestations and symptoms as adult trauma. It just has typically or can have more lasting effects on the brain. So,
exactly. And you have to also think a child's brain is not developed yet, right? Like,
hmm,
honestly, our brains don't even get developed till we're about 25 years old.
exactly.
So, technically, Caitlin and I only really just came into our full adult brains, which means
Hmm.
25 years of basically pre-adulthood trauma has been compacted, compounded, and really forming who we are, right?
Yeah.
Because usually what happens with trauma is like you have that traumatic event happen, you respond to it, and if you're not responding and healing, and or if you're just coping and kind of
Hmm.
getting through the day, then you're not your brain is rewiring to basically respond constantly to trauma versus actually healing,
Exactly.
growing, evolving. So by the time you get to 25, you're just coping mechanisms for
Hmm.
trauma. It's like kind of head trippy
Yeah.
stuff, but like, what do you think? Like,
Oh
you
yeah, no,
know,
I agree. I watched this a video a while back, and it was a young lady. She was saying how if you don't deal with your trauma from your childhood, it will show up in your present. So her example was, if you had trauma at say 4 years old and you're now 40, you're still acting as if you are that 4 year old when it comes to trauma and or um, or emotionally,
yeah,
right?
like emotionally like
So
stunted.
yeah, exactly. So you were stuck in that same place and you revert back to that childlike state from that very first interaction with trauma and or I guess remembering that trauma as well. So you're forever stuck in that place if you do not address said trauma, talk about said trauma, and fix um, those internal battles within yourself. So it's and imperative that, we have open conversations about things that may be traumatic to you, whether that be your friends, your support system, your mom and dad, your counselor, just someone that you can talk to clear your heart and mind so that you can move forward in your life.
Exactly. Or or ways that you can heal, not cope, but heal from your trauma. Prolonged growth and sustained ways of of dealing with the things that have happened to you, right? And
Which brings us. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, it's all good. I was thinking. I was just looking. I was thinking about those terms that you define, like acute trauma, chronic, and complex. And I'm looking and I'm thinking, acute trauma is kind of the it's from a single event, so that's one incident, like I guess something like a natural disaster, one time in your life kind of thing. But I'm thinking most people really have complex trauma, exposure to varied multiple traumatic events, often very invasive and interpersonal, like it's complex, it's compounded, it's long term, it's like trauma that's happening years and years and years. And then you go and you're experiencing that in childhood, and then you go into adulthood and you're supposed to like suddenly be healed and like be okay. Like that takes time to understand, takes time to work through, time to heal. And we just kind of like walk in the world like, oh well, you're an adult now, you should be okay, you should be perfectly adjusted to society. And it's like there's so much that a lot of people have not healed because of the complex trauma that they've had.
Absolutely. I would even say that everybody has, not everybody, but a majority of people have a mix between chronic and complex. And I say that just because a lot of people are experiencing abuse, whether it's, physical or emotional. Emotional abuse is so overlooked, so
Yes.
overlooked.
Yeah.
Most people are experiencing that from someone in their life at some point in time. Not only are they experiencing that, when you become an adult and you say you have experienced that as a child, you now think that's acceptable to have in your life as an adult, or that you should allow said behaviors like that into your life. And that's not the case at all. You're just repeating trauma from your childhood.
Exactly. And that's a good segue into our experiences like growing up. I definitely would say we are much closer to, well, I'll speak for myself. I'll say my experience was much closer to complex and chronic trauma, like repeated, prolonged, just emotional and really like verbal, psychological abuse from a parent. And that was prolonged. That was really the first 13 to 15 years of our lives,
Yep, I agree.
Like directly. And then it's since the person still continues to be, a problem, like traumatic. So, yeah, it's like, how do you think that has affected you today? And like, where do you see that your response to trauma, like maybe talk about your response to trauma as a child and then what you think your response to trauma is now.
I think my response to trauma now, or let's go to childhood first. My response to trauma as a child was definitely, I say just like shutting down, like just not responding, just complete like shut off. Um, and I think that was just like a protection mechanism because of um, the type of trauma, with it being an individual person. It was easier to just shut it down. Um, However, I would say as an adult, I don't think much has changed. And the reason why I say that is because, well, no, I'm not going to say that. I'm going to say now as an adult, I definitely talk about things way more than I did as a child. As a child, I tried to hide a lot of things just because I think I also didn't understand a lot of what was going on. So that makes it even more confusing. It was like it was normal because that's what was always happening with that person. So now as an adult, I now know that's wrong. So I talk about things and I want to move forward with my life. However, I will say there are some triggers that will cause me to go back to that childlike state of just shutting down for sure. So am I fully healed? No. Is it a work in progress? Absolutely. But I will say just learning to talk about it, being open about it, sharing with, those who are close that I can talk with and confide in, have definitely helped me learn how to cope with that childhood trauma to now be a better adult and heal. What
Yeah.
about
And
you?
I think I dealt with trauma by escaping a lot.
Mm-hmm.
and which is a response to trauma. I really dealt with it, I guess, sort of similar to you, by shutting down, but I would shut down and go somewhere else, even if it was just in
Yeah.
my own mind. And people knows about me, like I love old sitcoms and I love like I would sit as a kid and watch TCM for hours. You know what that is? That's
Mm-hmm.
Turner Classic Movies. So I watch old movies for hours. I watch old sitcoms for hours and hours and hours on end. And it was like that was the only sanctuary, only safe place I had. Nobody bothered. Everybody knew
Yeah,
when my shows were
seriously.
on. I was checked out. Nobody was gonna mess with me during that time. Nobody saw that as anything negative. And it was like the one time I could not be around like the abuse, you
Mm-hmm.
know, or
For
so it was
sure.
the one time that it would like cut off. So I attached to escaping, going into another world. It was easier for me to escape into whatever, Lucy was doing. I watched I Love Lucy. Whatever Lucy was doing, whatever, whatever movie was on TCM, it was easier to escape for those 2 hours. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And I think
Mm-hmm.
on some level, I think I still do that today. I mean, I spend, besides just actually like, pursuing filmmaking, which that is one reason, oddly enough, that I really became passionate about filmmaking as a kid, was because I saw that world and it helped me. And so I was like, that's how I can help other people, you know?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we used to always, me and my mom, because we've always been in a household where we have openly been able to talk with our mom, and so we would always be like, Courtney's just an escapist, which is so true. Like she literally, and I'm talking like checked out. Like you would be like waving your hand in front of her face, and she was just like not see it. Like you had to like scream Courtney in order to get her attention because she would just be so zoned out when things, were, or even just like chaos. When chaos would be around, it was like Courtney was just in her own zone, or yeah, anything, any type of discomfort. Courtney would definitely just be like, okay, let me remove myself and just go to my happy place.
Yeah.
So
And it's sad. I think about it now because, as a kid, you think, oh, well, I just like doing this.
yeah.
And you don't realize that I'm doing this because of the hell that is going on around me that I
Hmm.
have no way to control. We didn't have a
Exactly.
voice to even speak
Yep.
up about it. Um, and also, you mentioned our mom. I want to make it clear, our mom was not the abuser. That
Yes.
was not the person. It was really going to our dad's, being in that environment. So that environment was not
Just
conducive for
toxic.
children. It was really toxic. And that was all, you know, 8, 9 year old, 10-year old me knew to do, was to go be alone, and I sort of weep for that child now because I didn't have the tools. I didn't
Hmm.
have the understanding. I didn't have really anything. All I had was what was on TV, or what
Yeah.
was that little comfort that I could, and for whatever reason, he respected that space. He
Yeah.
respected that space pretty much. That was the only space he respected
Yeah, for
for,
sure. That he definitely did for you.
and I think, like, in the case of Caitlin, I think your way of handling it was always to check out. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Was always just
Hmm.
to, you would step away to things, but yours wasn't attached to like a television show or
To
anything
thing.
like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I also feel like mine wasn't quite as respected.
Yeah.
um, so it was like hard for me to like, I would just try to remove myself, but it was looked at as a sign of like, oh, she's just being defiant, or
Or
she's not listening
disrespectful.
to authority, or disrespectful. And so oftentimes I was just trying to protect myself, but I ended up having even more trauma because of the way that I would handle it. Right.
Mhm.
So, yeah, it was an interesting experience to say the least. But looking back, I definitely think that just being open and talking about it has truly helped. And trust me, like at one point, I was not able to talk about it. I was not able to be open about it. Went to counseling for it, and now at 25, I'm like just starting to realize the tools that the counselor had provided me, and using those now. So yeah,
Exactly. Yeah. It was tough without going into the gory details of it all. It was
yeah,
tough because you don't know what you don't know at that time. And
exactly.
it really wasn't our responsibility as children to know that. The
Hmm.
best thing we could have done was cope. That was
Yeah.
the only tool we had, was to cope,
Hmm. And I think what helped
and
us too is our mom was like opposite. Like she was extremely like open and stuff to us talking and expressing how we feel and allowing us the space to just be individuals, um, as well as just feeling how we felt, right? But he was like on the other extreme of that and was like, you can't do that.
Very
So it's like you're a
restrictive. Yeah.
child, you stay in a child's place kind of person, very much so like controlling. In that aspect, you can't have emotions at all. Like there should not be any emotion except for happy. So very dismissive for a child who was trying to figure those things out and explore those things for themselves.
Exactly. Yeah. And like what you said, like opposite experience, like at home. So like
Hmm.
we, it was oddly like this weird storm of like
Yeah,
abuse, but also love
relief.
and affection
Yeah,
and secure attachments. It
yeah.
was so, most of the time we were having that love, secure attachment, that sort of thing. And I really credit that to
Hmm.
be the only reason why we came out as sane adults. But
Facts. 100%.
like, yeah, but when we would, be with our father, it was just always, you were always on edge because you didn't
Oh
know
yeah. Yeah.
where the conversation was going, where he was physically going,
Yeah.
where the
First,
emotion was going. It was
yeah.
always he was it was just always up in the air, and it was
Yeah.
always like, I don't know what is gonna set him off today.
Seriously, yeah. He was just like a ticking time bomb most of our childhood. And you really didn't know what was going to set him off that day or what was going to trigger him that day or his personal issues that he would bring, um, home to us at the end of the day for to basically explode on us.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it was just like it's just like a bomb with a timer when it's just like when is it gonna go off? So
Yeah.
yeah.
And then as a child, just to survive, really, you have to develop certain skills just to survive around that person,
Oh yeah. Oh
And
yeah.
we were not within power to actually remove ourselves from those situations, you
Hmm.
know, because when we were there. Like, we were just like at the hands of this person, this man,
Hmm.
and it's like all we could do was develop ways to get through,
Exactly. Yeah. Just make it to the
Uh,
next day. No, seriously,
exactly.
I didn't think, a part of our coping mechanisms too was just make it to the next hour, just make it to the next day, just make it to the next week. Because it was just like you really just didn't know. On top of there was another adult there as well who was even, she saw these things and maybe didn't agree or did agree, who knows. And just allowed it. Like there were several individuals that did and kind of knew.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, just a super sad situation. Something that I don't think any child should have to experience because it really does change your it really does
You're
change your brain. You know what I mean? I think, like
exactly.
Courtney said, is our saving grace is our mom provided the complete opposite by providing a loving and open home, right? So we had like wiring trauma to rewiring, a hopeful child
Yeah.
and a
And
productive
it
child.
still never
So
really leaves us like as much rewiring as our
oh
mother
yeah,
did. It's
oh
like
yeah,
it doesn't
it's
go
never
away till you
enough.
heal it.
For
It
sure.
doesn't go away till you heal it. It's like,
And even
you
then, it
know,
never goes away. It's a constant process of healing. You'll never not heal from trauma.
yeah.
Just like me,
Or
I said earlier,
yeah,
like I have triggers till this day that would like put me back in that childlike state. So I
exactly.
mean, it's always a work in progress. It's not something that will ever just go away or vanish. So,
Exactly. And I think that's a really good one. Like, you said certain triggers to this day. And one
hmm.
trigger, I'll give a very specific story, but we had graduated high school. We were 18 years old, and this is the first time we had seen our father in like years
Hmm.
had gone by.
Hmm.
But he came to our graduation party, not of an invitation of our own, but of an invitation of another adult, which is
A
another
third
issue.
party that had nothing to do with said
A third,
situation
yes,
as
and that
well.
was also
A
inappropriate
huge trigger.
because, again, traumatizing people, because even though you have no idea what the backstory is. So
Hmm.
that, but
Yeah.
that's
But
her.
that was a
That's
huge
that's that.
trigger.
That's a huge trigger, and that's for her to deal with God. We'll say that.
Yeah,
Okay,
for sure.
but But in that situation, like my response to just even being in the same room with him because of all that unhealed trauma, even though I hadn't seen the man in years by that point, was like my body was like shaking. Like I don't know if you knew, if you were like that too, but it was like seeing your abuser again. It was like, I don't know how to respond to this. So my body is just kind of like, it was almost like it started to get into fight or flight,
For sure.
because all that unhealed trauma, like you might not be seeing that person regularly, but it comes up when that situation comes up again. So I remember just being like, I don't even know how to speak to you. I don't know how to whatever, because really it was like I was transported back to like 8-9-year-old me who couldn't say anything and who, you know what I mean? And that was a really horrible sinking feeling that everybody ignored. Because they didn't, because of whatever they wanted to see or whatever they felt like was reconciling and healing. But that was not healing for me
at all. And I also think like what got me about that situation was we now were, I think at that time we were 18, right? Something like that. Maybe 17, 18, something like that. And we had the voice, right? We haven't seen this person in years because we also made that choice not to. For someone to take that power away from you, though you have experienced trauma, and this person knew about the trauma.
Said trauma,
and just brought them back in the picture because she felt like that's what needed to happen. That is such a powerless feeling of someone who has worked hard to work through their trauma. And towards healing, situations that have happened in their life. That is
it's not your place.
Yeah, it's not your place. And that is the most terrible feeling because that's, exactly how a person typically with childhood trauma probably felt, was hopeless or they couldn't do anything because they were a child, right? So when you're an adult and you're not able to do that because of someone else, I was so frustrated that day. And when I get frustrated, I kind of just shut down. And that's all I could do was shut down. I think we even talked about just not even going to the party, which is our own graduation party. But we were just like, we did not sign up for that at all.
And it's, and that's one of those things of like when you're an adult, but you're like not fully an adult yet. And people still feel the need to sort of like step into your life and have their own say about it. And that situation, that person might have been totally feeling like this is the right thing to do. We're going to have some sort of reconciliation moment or whatever. But what you're not realizing is somebody else has a different experience of that person.
At the expense of your decision.
At the expense of your decision, exactly. We don't have the same experience. To you, you might have heard everything. You might have seen things that this person did. They did not do that to you.
Exactly.
So it's not your place to step in and try to create some moment so that you feel good about it. It's not your place. It's healing. It's our place when we find the space to heal for ourselves. Absolutely. That would have been appropriate if we had invited or if we had reached out to him and asked him to come and be a part of our space. It wasn't appropriate for anybody else to do that.
Exactly. And our own mom was like, no, that's y'all's call. You know what I mean? So for this third party individual to interject themselves in the situation was just like mind blowing.
Yeah.
To say the least.
And, that brings up a good point. It's like, what is your body's response to when you are put back into a traumatic situation? And there's 5 F's, because I thought it was just fight or flight, which is true. There is fight or flight, but there's also freeze, which is being paralyzed or unable to move. Flop, doing what you're told without being able to protest. Fight, fighting, what we know already. Flight, hiding or moving away. Or fawn, trying to please someone who harms you. And I'm so glad I found this, and because everyone thinks it really is a fight or flight. But a lot of times you're doing freeze, flop, and fawn. A lot of times you're just like, let me just do what they say without protesting. So hopefully it'll go away.
Seriously. Yeah.
And same thing with fawn, trying to please whoever's harming you. And honestly, when people talk about rape specifically, that's what a lot of people do, flop and fawn. They just do it. They're obviously having a traumatic experience, but they're doing it because they're hoping that it'll just be over and it'll end.
Yeah.
And people don't count that as some sort of, as a response to trauma, but it is. It's like, and when you're immediately put in a traumatic situation, you are trying to figure out, your body almost doesn't have time to fully react and respond.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Your body's just trying to get you out of that situation. It's literally like survival of the fittest, you know? Your
Mm-hmm.
body is literally just trying to survive in said trauma. On top of, so
Exactly.
trauma is technically like a stress response. Your body is only supposed to respond to a certain amount of stress. It's not supposed to be prolonged stress. Maybe short term little spurts of it, right? So your body is just trying to live, you know? So constantly being in said environments that are traumatic, can you imagine the doozy it does to your brain? Like, oh my goodness.
Exactly. Yeah. Absolutely. And I'm so glad I found those 5 F's, because I'm like, I'm gonna start using that now, because everybody thinks if you don't fight or flight, then it's not a response to trauma, or something traumatic didn't happen to you. And it's like, you can very well be standing paralyzed or doing what you're told and be having a traumatic experience, because that's what we were having. We were doing what we were told to do.
Oh yeah.
And we were having absolutely traumatic experiences, you know?
Oh yeah.
And
We
just
definitely
because
were
someone
freezing and flopping. So
freezing, flopping, and fawning. And honestly, I think 9 times out of 10, a lot of people go with that because they see, well, if I just comply, you know?
it'll just get me out of it.
And yeah.
Yeah, for
Go ahead.
sure. I was gonna say, and the thing is that obviously that's a trauma response, but typically when you submit to said abuser, they just think that they could just do it even more. They don't even realize that it's a trauma response at all.
Or they're thinking, oh, you're okay with this. You're co-signing it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I agree.
Sad.
Crazy. I agree. And it's very, I'm glad we're giving some speech to this now. And I'm hoping somebody who's listening can actually, like, you know, identify with these, or, you know, can use these, because when we just don't call something, when we don't give it the proper language to say this is a trauma response, or this is a fight or flight, then we're assuming that trauma didn't happen, and that's not the case. You know what I mean?
For sure.
And you know,
just like for example, like I never knew that, like, a lot of, because Courtney was an escapist. There's a lot of things Courtney maybe didn't see or hear like directly in our traumatic experience with our dad. And I didn't realize that it affected her in a traumatic way for a very, 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 very long, just because she didn't receive a lot of like the physical part of it, right? But she experienced it just like I did, and her traumatic experience with the individual is the same as mine, in the sense that we both experienced it by that person, right? However, hers just wasn't maybe the physical aspect of it. Hers maybe, more of like an emotional, or however she describes it. So I had to also even come to my own understanding of that. Courtney did experience trauma. It just may have not been the exact trauma that I experienced or how I perceived it.
Yeah, I think a lot of that's a really good point you bring that up, is like, you know, we experience the same person doing relatively the same things, but how you were viewing my response to trauma versus how I was viewing your response to trauma. And that caused some like rift even in our relationship for a while, because it was almost like, oh, well, you didn't experience what I experienced, so what are you complaining about? And I honestly, I dealt with that for a long time, because I didn't have the scars. You know what I mean? But that didn't mean I didn't have the emotional scars, or that I didn't have this like psychological scars of experiencing him, you know? And then even some of the things I had to do in an attempt to protect my sister was scarring. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So things that like kids shouldn't have to do. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I'm glad to hear that you like recognize that now, that you know that like we were both his level, because of his personality, like he was inflicting the same amount of trauma on both of us. It was just handled. We experienced it differently, or responded to it differently.
For sure. For sure.
Yeah. But yeah, so on that note, here's some common like mental health effects of trauma, like some of the things that your body will kind of, or things that you will do if you are experiencing trauma, right? So things you'll have is like flashbacks, right? So that's reliving aspects of a traumatic event or feeling as if it's happening now, like having like intense flashbacks. Panic attack, same things. It's a fear response. It's an exaggeration of your body's response to danger or to excitement. Disassociation, one way your mind copes with overwhelming stress. You feel numb, space out, detached from your body, or the world around you begins to seem unreal. So, like Caitlin was saying, I think disassociation was a way that we both kind of responded to it.
You know, in very different ways as well.
In different ways as well. And that's why it's like trauma responses are so individual, and why it's important to find your journey to healing. Because even though we were both disassociating, you know, Caitlin's disassociation might be removing herself physically from the space or going somewhere else or just trying not to interact with somebody, right? And mine was always, I'm gonna go watch TV or I'm gonna go like do this, you know? So yeah, I mean it's just interesting when you really like get down into it. There is no one way to respond. We have to, when we are talking to people who are dealing with trauma or people who are dealing with these issues, or responses to trauma, we can't just say, well, you know, if it doesn't look like XYZ, if you're not having regular panic attacks every Tuesday, then you didn't have something happen to you. You know what I mean?
Exactly. And I think it's so ignorant of anyone to assume that at this point in life. We were talking with our mom this morning, and she was like, you know, she is experiencing, you know, she has experienced her own trauma throughout her life, obviously. And she has like a women's group. But she made a point about saying, you know, now when people are behaving in certain ways, her first question is, what is your story? What is the trauma that you have experienced? What in life has broken you and XYZ? Because all of those things stem from something that has happened in someone's life. That did not come from nowhere, you know? Obviously, not everybody is willing to just share those things open and out, you know, as much as we are. But it definitely makes you look at people differently when you have that question instead of assuming, oh, well, you just have an attitude problem. Like, what happened to you for you to have said attitude problem? And I promise you will be amazed and or saddened and shocked by the things that people have experienced in their life.
Exactly. Absolutely. Yeah. It takes a level of empathy and consideration to really think outside of yourself and say, okay, this person, while this behavior might be irritating or frustrating for me right now, but the only way this person could have come to this behavior as a response, especially if you've done nothing, or if you really truly know that like I've done nothing but behave normally and they respond that way, it's probably some trauma behind it somehow, some way.
You know, it's really just unhealed trauma, right? Because I think everybody has experienced trauma. That is what someone who is unhealed looks like.
Exactly. Yes.
100%.
Absolutely. And, you know, that brings us to the next point. What does unhealed really look like? I think the funny thing about like this era is there's so much talk about mental health and so much talk about trauma, and everyone's like, so-and-so's toxic. Everybody's toxic.
Yep.
Or everybody's unhealed, you know? And so we're like, okay, so what does a really unhealed person like truly look like in your life? Like, how can I identify somebody who has experienced trauma and is, you know, dealing with it in unhealthy ways? What do you think?
I don't know, because I truly think that everybody has something to heal, right? And or to work towards healing. So, but I will say some like standout behaviors would be like older individuals acting like a child or a childish in said situations, right?
Exactly.
Or
Yeah.
being emotionally immature when it comes to others' needs, or and just like how they respond to said traumatic situations. If you know, say I didn't heal and I constantly just continue to just shut down and not talk about my feelings and stuff like that, that would, I'm pretty sure that would show someone that I am unhealed if they are emotionally immature. So I would say those are some like direct signs, but I also think that there's a lot of unhealed people that you may not see signs of, you know, just depending on who the person is, their characteristics, who they present themselves as. But yeah, I mean, it really just depends because everybody's so different.
I agree. Yeah. I think, you know, obviously everybody kind of wants this like catch all. Like, okay, well, if they do XYZ, they want it in like black and white, then that's an unhealed person. You know what I mean? And it's as complex as the trauma itself, you know?
Exactly.
There is no, well, he's wearing, or he shouts at, he like yells at the gas station, so he is unhealed. Like, that's catch all, you know? That's not how it is. I think unhealed shows up in a lot of ways. I think it shows up in how, if you're able to accept love, if you're able to give love and affection, if you're able to have empathy, if you're able to have compassion for people, if you're able to, even if you're able to be like goal oriented and see better for yourself, if you're able to like have a sense of self-worth, I think that kind of stuff is where you can see whether someone is unhealed or not. You know what I mean? And, you know, now that I'm thinking about it, I really think the big telltale sign for me of an unhealed person is, it goes to me back to that, like, kind of to self-worth. It's like, do I feel like I am worth having the good things in life, or having respect? Am I worthy of love? Am I worthy of, you know, consideration, compassion, empathy? Am I worthy of those things?
For sure. And to me, 100% agree.
Yeah, because I feel like if an unhealed person would, for whatever reason, and due to their trauma and their response to trauma, would feel like,
they don't deserve those things.
They don't deserve those things at the very least.
For sure.
Because they're still operating in that fight or flight or fawn or whatever mode, you know? They're in sense of, okay, that happened to me, I've healed, and now I deserve better. You know what I mean?
Exactly. 100%.
So that's a telltale sign to me. People who really absolutely just lack self-worth, I'm always like, there's probably something behind that.
Yeah, I agree with that for sure.
And the way you can really tell people who lack self-worth is if they do pretty much self-sabotage, self-harm things, you know? And it doesn't have to be, I slit my wrist or I drink, you know, alcohol all the time. It doesn't have to be that. It's, do they constantly get in bad relationships that are going nowhere for them? You know what I mean?
Decisions.
Do they constantly make poor decisions? Do they constantly, you know, try to put others down to feel better about themselves? Like, that to me is always a sign of somebody who just has not dealt with whatever they need to deal with.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean?
I agree. I wholeheartedly agree.
So, yeah. Do you think, what do you think? Like, what's your like key sign for an unhealed person? Because that's kind of my key one.
Yeah. My key sign, I think how they treat others. And I say that because if you're unhealed, especially like childhood trauma, you are treating people, or you're basically like begging for what you want in a toxic way, right? So I think that is how, I think it's really how you treat others is where you are as far as your traumatic experience. And I was watching another video one time, and the girl was saying how she was doing, she had a traumatic childhood. So she did like an experiment, I guess, to tap into her inner child. And she was just like having a really bad experience doing whatever experiment she was doing. But she was saying how like she kept fighting somebody trying to hold her while she was experiencing the trial. And so she just kind of like let herself be eventually after doing it for a couple tries. And eventually she just was at peace. And she was like, why am I at peace? And it was because someone was holding her. And that's what she wanted as a child, is for someone to just hold her and comfort her during her trauma, right? So, you know, just that. How you're treating others will clearly show what you're lacking and or that what you have experienced, and basically that you're unhealed. But typically it's because you want that in return. So like, say you're talking bad about somebody, it's probably because you want to be there and you just cannot be there at this very moment because you have things to work on or things to heal or whatever the case may be. But I definitely think how you treat others.
I agree. Yeah, those are really good things to look at. And I think that's true too. It's like if you're walking around in the world like upset about how you live or how your life has turned out to be or whatever, you don't even see when you see the good in someone else, it's like you can't even process it really. That's what I
Exactly.
think. It's like
And
their
then you
only
hate on it.
understand exactly. Their only understanding is negativity.
Yep.
So because they're so like steeped in it, when they see
Mhm.
somebody thriving and happy and healed and living, they're like, that must be brought down. You know
Oh
what I
yeah.
mean? Like
Oh yeah.
it's ultimate like hater,
For
you
sure.
know?
For
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. And the thing is you'll encounter unhealed people everywhere. Work, school, friends,
Mhm.
groups, that you're in. Roommate situations.
So
Everywhere.
so what are some ways you think you like healed your trauma? Like what are some things that you some tools and resources that you have used that have helped you like move past the traumatic events that we've experienced?
Well, I think for me, I was always really external about it. And I think
Mhm.
one initial way I did is I played volleyball for a very long time.
Mhm.
Right. And
Mhm.
so that was a real physical way of not only sort of distracting from my life, but it kept me kind of, I'm like, I'm moving, I'm going. I'm like, I had practices. I had school practices, club practices, like training, like doing camps and stuff, like workouts and all that stuff. So I was really almost distracted, you know,
Yeah.
and
Mhm.
it made me really put it out of my mind. I don't think that was always the healthiest way, especially as a child, as a
Mhm.
young person, minor, but that was one way that I think you can deal with it. But now I look back at it, it wasn't healing, it was coping. That's what that was.
Exactly.
It was coping.
Yeah.
And it was a really, I could really structure my life around a coping mechanism, you
Mhm.
know. And um so that was one way I dealt with it. I think I did, escape through, continuing to like watch movies and things like that. And then as I got older into college, it became artwork work. But what I find myself doing now, sitting with now, especially like being in between projects and things like that, I find myself really just like things will come up out of nowhere. Feelings and stuff will come up out of nowhere. And I'm like, that's something I did not deal with.
Yeah.
That's something I didn't think about. And it's because I always had something to do to not think about it. I was coping.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I think really my healing journey has only really just begun,
Yeah.
you know. But what
Mhm.
about you? What kind of things do you think you did over time in your life to either cope or heal?
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So one thing I'll hit on real quick is we're going to define healing and coping really quick, just so there's a better understanding here. Um,
Mm,
so healing is long-term changes that help us to thrive rather than just surviving. And then coping is managing symptoms to make it through the day. So a short-term solution to traumatic events, right? Okay, so what I would say, I would agree with Courtney in saying that I coped for a while, a while, and Courtney probably can attest to this. Um, right after the last event that happened with our abuser, um, I was just angry. I was
mm.
extremely angry. And would you agree?
Yeah, I would agree. And it was like I knew what the direct cause was, so I wasn't like
Mm-hmm.
totally ignorant. But I think you didn't realize how deep the anger was.
Yeah, I
And
definitely did not.
so I didn't so when it would come, I don't think you realized how much anger was coming out at all times.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, on top of I was just so numb because I was like, "How could this have happened?" I think also I was just really numb, so I was coping by, I just worked all the time, tried to keep myself busy, and if I wasn't working, I just slept all the time. I really had like a very lackadaisical outlook at life, and just like I didn't really want anything. I didn't really see. I don't know if you know this, but I didn't really see myself living past a certain age. Like I was very just like,
I didn't know
forget
that.
it. You know what I
I
mean?
didn't know about
I
the
was,
see yourself living past a certain age.
yeah, like I wasn't like suicidal or anything like that. But it was just more of like, you know what? I see an end to this and quickly. So I just did not,
It's like
I just,
hopelessness.
Oh yeah, it was completely hopeless, and I just could not see the future because I was just stuck in this place. And I think more than anything, it was just I was stuck. I didn't know where to go. I didn't know how to move. I was just like numb. So
And
I don't.
maybe you
Mhm.
can, I don't know if you felt this too. You don't know what to call it either. It's
Yeah,
just
I had
happening.
no idea. Yeah, and it was like, yeah, it was just such a confusing. And I think also too for it to be a parent, it was just like, how could this happen? How?
Yeah,
That is the one
absolutely.
person that is supposed to protect you and love you. And while I had a parent that was doing that, the other one was complete opposite. So it was like it was just so conflicting for me as a child who also was exploring themselves and life and XYZ. So I was just super conflicted. So I was very angry and coped for years. And during that time of coping, I went to therapy with a counselor, and she, looking back now in hindsight, was absolutely amazing. She definitely wasn't trying to like fix anything right then and there, and she was just kind of like, you just have to go through this period of being angry, and that's okay. Be angry because these things have happened to you. It's better to explore those feelings, allow those feelings to be, and then heal in that process, right? So she definitely promoted me just kind of like experiencing what I was experiencing, feeling how I felt, while being like, it isn't okay to take that out on somebody else. You need to redirect that in a way that is functional and or beneficial for you, while not in the process of hurting others. So I will say that, as well as she taught me this one thing. She said it's okay to be a BITCH, and it stood for something. I can't remember exactly what it stood for, but till this day, that sticks with me. And she was saying like that doesn't mean you have to be nasty and rude or anything, but that's just kind of like owning, who you are, your experiences, and being open and talking about those things and being confident and all of these things. And so, till this day, that sticks with me more than anything I've ever learned in my entire life. um, just because feel like that acronym and what it stood for, I don't even remember what it stood for, but her telling me that really got me to healing, using
I
that
remember
acronym to not just survive, to literally get through it.
it means being in total control of herself.
Exactly. Yes, that's what it stood for.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And
Yeah,
that's not saying like be a control freak. That's just being like, you know what? I own this has happened to me and I want to move forward. So that's
exactly.
what she meant in that aspect. And I didn't realize she told you that too. But that like I said, I didn't even remember what it meant, but I knew it was something powerful, and I was like, I'm gonna do that. So
Mhm.
I would say that the experience of dealing with that therapist and that acronym has really really helped me heal instead of continuing to cope.
Yeah, I agree. I think, just like you said, being in total control of yourself, I think, to me, one of the weakest things you can do is take your trauma and then inflict it onto other people.
Exactly.
That's the weakest thing you can do. You didn't learn. You actually gave in to your abuser, your oppressor.
Exactly. You're no better than your abuser.
You're no better than them. So
Mhm.
to me, I can always tell a healed person by how they really treat others. Like, is this person kind? Are they genuine? Do they move in the world with a serious intention to be a good person?
Exactly.
If you see people who are like always skeptical or jumpy or whatever, they got
Mhm.
something to work out.
For
And you
sure.
don't know how long it's gonna take, but they got something to work out. They're not there yet. My take is leave it alone, but deal with that accordingly.
Mhm.
But yeah,
Mhm.
it's just, you're gonna encounter unhealed people everywhere. It's gonna be work, school, friends, family. That's the hardest one to deal with a lot of
Oh
times
yeah.
because you love them a lot of the times, or you have
Mhm.
to deal with them regularly, and they're sitting there deeply unhealed. And so sometimes they're inflicting that trauma on you. And it's a
Mhm.
good point is our father, he obviously had some issues with himself. Stuff
Oh, for
we really
sure.
don't even fully know about. We just know what he did to
Mhm.
us, because nobody who's healed behaves that way towards children, right?
Yeah.
You know? So his stuff, I'm sure, runs even deeper than what he did to us.
For sure. For
But
sure.
that's for his podcast and his time with Jesus or whoever. But but yeah, and it's not our job to figure that out. It's not, because we were the children in that situation.
Oh
But
yeah.
it's now that we are adults, I see clearly that he was behaving out of his own trauma, his own lack of self-worth, his own lack of self-esteem. You know what I mean? His own lack of seeing direction for himself in his life. He must have been acting out of that, because how do you otherwise? There's no way you really just walk around having that little empathy, that little compassion for people, especially your own children. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Not like even like knowing kind of like bits and pieces of his childhood. It makes sense, you know?
Yeah,
Like it
absolutely.
completely makes sense. To why he is the way he is, on top of he had a traumatic brain injury basically. So on top of that. So I mean, you know, don't get me wrong, it makes sense, but that does not justify by any means. That does not make it okay. And I think that's one of the biggest things I had to come to terms with is, you know, though those things happen to you and you may empathize with him because of experiences that he may experience, that does not justify him doing those things to you.
Exactly. Yeah. And that just brings up another point. Healing is for your health.
Yeah.
It's not really, it's not about, you know, making the other person feel good or making the other person whatever. It's about your relationship with yourself. How do you heal? How do you move on? How do you exist in the world as a better person, better version of yourself? And that's why I think it's important to go to heal, not just cope, but go for long-term sustainable changes that are going to help you to thrive in this world rather than just get through day to day and survive, you know?
100%.
But yeah, so, well, I think we're going to wrap it up about there. Unless, is there anything else you want to say? You know, that was just kind of our first intro into trauma. Like we said, it's going to be a series. So we just wanted to kind of get our feet wet, explain a little bit about trauma and how trauma manifests in our lives, what that looks like, and share some of our personal experiences. So yeah, anything else you want to add?
No, I think out of all of the things that we talked about trauma, I do want to hit on that trauma is your experience. And how you deal with those things as far as healing and even coping, no one should tell you you are right or wrong in your experience. So, you know, it's easier said than done, especially as a child, because it's like, you know, your parents are leading you on this path of succession, right? But really just like allowing yourself to explore what works and what doesn't work for you so that you can get to a better place for you. Because at the end of the day, you live with you and that's it. You are only accountable for you. So you have to do what's best for you. So don't let anyone else tell you what you should and should not be doing or what is and is not correct. That is your process. That is what you feel like you need to do for you. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. Try something new. So that's what I'll end with on the trauma speech. But yeah,
as long as you're not hurting anybody.
For sure. You don't hurt anybody now.
Exactly. Yeah. As long as you're not hurting anybody.
Yeah, it needs to be in a way that is benefiting you
that's healthy,
or not hurting anyone else. So yeah, it needs to be healthy.
Exactly. Yeah. Absolutely.
For sure.
Yeah. So we're excited to keep, you know, having this conversation. We got lots of other topics. Realm of mental, emotional health. This is something we both have just been like, as you can see, like grappling with now that we're like adults, you know, trying to like heal all that stuff and think about it and really address those issues so we don't take it into any future things that we do. You know, we don't take it into, especially not any children or relationships or anything we might enter into. It's important to sit and think about those things, as hard as it might be. It's important to analyze and consider what really happened to you. And was what happened okay? And how did it affect you? How did you respond? How do you respond now to those things that happened to you? You know what I mean? It's important to do that stuff, because whether you like to think of it or not, you are acting out of trauma all the time.
Oh yeah.
All the time.
Oh yeah.
And it's important, you know, I'm hoping this discussion helps somebody become even self-aware and really think, how am I behaving? How do people see me when I'm, you know, acting in the world? What are things that I've done to people that may be a response to trauma? Or have I been the trauma in somebody else's life?
Oh, yeah.
Because that's also true. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We're all the victim and the villain, you know? So, So yeah, we're excited to continue this conversation. The next one we're going to be talking about is narcissism. Got a lot to say about that. So yeah, make sure you tune in. All right. We'll see you in the next one.
Tune into the next CaCo Talks.
Bye.
Bye.
Before we end this episode, we wanted to take some time to remind our listeners, if you or someone you know are struggling with mental or emotional health or any of the issues we discussed in our podcast, you are not alone. There are resources to help. In the podcast descriptions, we've listed contact information for 3 resources we suggest for crisis situations. You can reach out to the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, or the National Suicide Prevention Hotline.